Hello, welcome to Shared Parenting Coaching, Tuesdays at 8 p.m. on Zoom. Our coach tonight is Colleen O'Neil. She's a Master of Social Work and a Master of Education. Colleen holds a degree in Social Work and Education. Yes, she is trained divorce mediator, coach, therapist, and educator. Her practice, Mediation and Beyond in Westport, Connecticut, serves family in all phases of divorce process and after. Take it away, Colleen.
Hey, thanks, John, and thanks everyone for coming on tonight. And those who will see this in the future, I hope you can learn some things. And if you do, pass them along to other people. So our Zoom coaching is every Tuesday night, as John had shared, and from 8 to 8:30, where we just kind of dispense, I don't want to say advice, but professional experience, wisdom. We're certainly not legal advice, we're not financial advice, and we're not mental health advice. But it is from professional and personal experience about things surrounding the areas of divorce. And so we're here to answer questions that come in. You can send your questions in either via email, or you can come on, and certainly you can come on anonymously and just put your questions in the chat, or send them in, or get on if you'd like and ask a question. So there's a lot of ways to for us to get your questions that come in. I think that what I've seen is most of the questions have been emailed in, which has been really helpful. So John, I just thought I'd start off with one tonight that I had from a woman named Victoria. She says, my ex is taking me back to court. Do I have to get an attorney? I can't afford one. And I see that time and time again where people are going back to court for post-divorce issues, for whatever those issues might be. I don't think everybody has to have an attorney to go back to court. I think you can be your best advocate. You're not required to bring counsel into the courtroom or on Zoom, as most of the things are happening these days in most states, but you're not required. Obviously you could, but I think if you go in, you can be your best advocate. I always tell people, please go in with as much documentation around the issue, that's the motion that's been filed, so the issue at hand. A lot of times it seems to be around finances or co-parenting issues, people wanting more time. So in Victoria's case, she was saying, well, my ex would like more time with the child, although he doesn't actually spend the time he's supposed to now in the parenting plan. So in that case, for someone like Victoria, where your ex is going back to court seeking more time, but that person's not even holding true to the initial agreed upon parenting plan or parenting responsibility plan, then you can go back in and substantiate what you're saying is untrue about what he's presenting. So when I say substantiate, you need to keep track of when the visits occur, when they don't occur, when they get canceled, when they don't get canceled. And that's keeping a log. Either that's going to be through text messages, emails, phone calls, or even using such things as Our Family Wizard or Fair, or any of those apps where we talked about, I think last week, and that were mentioned. And you can go on and see the other recordings, because there's always other apps out there that are helpful for the courts to be able to document these things. So if you just go into court and you just go in and say, well, what he's saying is not true, the judge doesn't know. He or she isn't in your life. They have to only be able to go there, what's called the trier of fact. So you have to bring in facts in order for them to delineate what's really going on here. And so again, I'm just going to go back to, if your husband or wife is bringing you back to court and you also think it's frivolous, meaning they haven't spent the time that was allocated to begin with, now they're seeking more time, and you're taking time off from work, and or you've decided to hire an attorney and go back in, you can always ask for court fees, court costs. That doesn't mean you'll get them, but you should ask for them, because if a judge does rule in your favor and says, well, this was frivolous, this person's not even honoring the first agreement, and why are we moving into a second agreement on parenting time? That judge may say, listen, you can't keep dragging this person in and out of court. They work, they don't have money for an attorney. So that court may award attorney fees. I've seen that happen. It does happen. It doesn't happen like I'd like it to happen in a lot of cases, but it does happen. So in essence, you do not need an attorney to go back to court. I think there's plenty of very smart people out there that can substantiate their own lives against what the motion that that person is filing. So I don't always think it's in your best interest or that you have to. So that's to Victoria's question. Any thoughts on that, John?
Yes, it also depends on whether the person has a sort of emotional and I don't know, the sort of internal fortitude to go into court with all those unknowns in a very formal setting and make a good representation of his or her position. Not everybody has that.
I would agree with that, but I guess I don't want people to be intimidated or think that they can't.
Yeah.
So I understand about having the emotional fortitude. I understand it would be a new and unusual experience for that person because most of us have not been in a courtroom in that way, or the last time they were in court, their divorce was ending and that was traumatizing anyway. So they may associate the courtroom with a kind of traumatic kind of experience or anxiety ridden. But what I'm saying is it doesn't have to be that way, because when you go in and you have your facts down and you have your proof to go in with, and you can have an attorney speak on your behalf, but I just want to empower people that they can also speak on their own behalf as well, that it's not something that is not allowed. You are allowed to go in and do that.
Well, absolutely. And of course, that's called pro se representation. Yeah. And it's very common in divorce court.
I wouldn't recommend it for a trial. Like if they're going to push it to a trial, let's say, or whatever. Although I did have a woman once who did her own trial and did very well at that, actually. Very proud of her. And she was not an attorney. She was in the finance field. So it was a whole new world for her. But what I'm saying is that you can do that. You can go in and try to advocate for yourself and get a judge to say, this is it. This is what I have against what they have. So, but on to something else, John, that I had a gentleman named Michael write in. He said, divorce is hard on women. I hear this all the time, he said. And he said, but is it harder on men? Because from his vantage point, and I won't go into all his whole email, in his vantage point, it was harder on men, and they don't get enough, or equally as hard on men, and they don't get enough credence for that. Like people think it's not hard on men. And I think what I would say to that are a couple of things. I think the difference for men is, one of the things is I think that men skip kind of that grieving process of divorce because they don't have the same social network that women have. Women have girlfriends and family members that they'll be open with and go to. And a lot of guys do not necessarily have that. I mean, they have male friends, but it's not for going out and talking about their feelings around their marriage ending. And so it can be a little more isolating. Women also tend to seek out professional help through therapists, counselors, mediators, divorce coaches, or things along those lines. And so they're more apt to reach out for professional help, where men are less likely to do that. And so again, it can become a more isolating experience for them. Typically in divorce also, men's health can tend to decline a little more because they isolate. You can see a little more of the non-exercising, the overeating, the drinking, not being as active, because your whole social network has now changed. We all know that when you're divorced, you know, all the couples and families and all that used to do together is now gone. So it's a whole new world for everybody. And I think men get especially hit a little harder with that. And also too, women tend to be the ones to like make the doctor's appointments and, you know, honey, you know, did you go to the doctor for this? Or, you know, we're as a family, we're going to the dentist, or, you know, keep track of those things. And when that's gone, it's not a role that men typically just jump into for themselves. I also think there's a little loss of identity for women, for sure, with, loss of being a wife and stuff. But I think men are still, whether we like it or not, that they identify through their work and they identify through their roles. So a role as a dad and a role as a husband, and then his role in his career. And when they lose that identity as, dad on the daily basis, and then a husband, that can be a big hit for a man. Where a woman, when she gets divorced, she's no longer a wife, but she's still in that motherly role more so than the men are. And that's typically because the men are still, it's less traditional than it used to be, but still men are typically in that earning capacity and taking care of the family in that way. And so it can hit them a little harder. I also think that, and I know there's statistics out on that, where men tend to rush into relationships quicker. They're more apt to marry more quickly. Women are less likely to remarry as often as men. That also works for widows too. Men are, if they've become a widow, they tend to remarry more quickly than a woman would. A woman typically might stay a widow or a widower. I forget how that one is. But so they tend to kind of rush into another relationship. And you've probably heard, John, or I'm sure the viewers out there have heard, where a man typically won't leave a relationship until he has another relationship to go to. And that's not for all men, obviously. I don't want to be stereotyping, but there are stats out there on those things that show that men enter relationships, and not necessarily do they last, because a lot of times you're jumping into them after you've just left the other one. And so it doesn't work out so well. And I think, men miss their children immensely, and there's not a lot, when women can still be part of the PTA, they can still be part of the going to school during the day, or they can be a recess mom when the kids are younger, and they can be on the playground, and they go to the cookie sales and the bake sales, and they're on the field trips. And I'm not saying dads do not do that, but they're less likely to have the opportunity to do that. It's not that they wouldn't want to, but the opportunity hasn't really prevailed for them to be able to step in to those roles. And so you even feel more removed, not only from your children, but from all the parents even, right? So, your ex-wife's been, still involved in the school, and you go to the school and she's talking to everybody, and you're like, you feel kind of lost. You don't really know where to sit and who to talk to, and where you used to go together as a couple and you united as a family. So all those things are really challenging in a different way for men that really don't get talked about enough. I think they don't get talked about enough. We talk about the hit for women, and a lot of it looks like we'll look at it financially, or, you're a single mom by yourself. But the dad's also a single dad by himself too. And they're different, but it can still have an equal level of pain around it.
That's so true. Thanks, Colleen. Very interesting. I think my experience as a single dad, half-time dad, so I wanted to get more involved in school activities, and I went to help out at the elementary school where my kids were, and tried to be more active that way. But I did feel kind of odd, because everybody else there was a mother. I think I was the only dad that I saw anyway, helping out at school. There were a lot of dads, picking up, and this is 20 years ago. So a lot of roles are changing. So I think that's important too.
It is important, and I actually think one of the blessings, if we can find some in this COVID crisis, really is, John, that dads are home. Yeah. And I really, especially like down in, we're in Connecticut, and down in, Fairfield County, where, these men are trekking 3 hours, 4 hours of train ride a day, and, leaving at 5:30, 6 in the morning, and getting home 7, 8 at night. those are really long days, so they can provide for their families, and they've missed out on a lot, where now they're home. They don't have those trekking in those hours. So you get all those hours put back in the family. And, I just do this, that they're really taking advantage as a family unit, take advantage of the time to have dad home. I'm sure it's been an adjustment for mom and dad and the kids too, but I'm hoping that although we hear the divorce rates or people desiring divorce is skyrocketing, I'm actually hopeful that people have been able to be grateful for that time that they've had home, that men are able to go out and take a lunch break and go ride your bike with your kid or throw a ball or whatever it's going to be. But I'm hoping that something good and positive can come out of rebuilding some relationships that also needed to be rebuilding instead of torn apart. So that's I'm hopeful.
Yes, that's great. Yeah, I hope you're doing more family therapy, reunification therapy, or whatever, instead of helping people separate. But well, let's see. I had a question about child support. Do you want to move on to that?
Yeah, let's go right ahead.
Yeah, in my role as the chair of the Shared Parenting Council, I spent a lot of time on child support guidelines. This is a few years ago. In Connecticut, there's a commission on child support guidelines that every 5 years by statute, they're supposed to meet and review the guidelines and recommend new guidelines. Well, the problem, and a lot of my testimony and many others' testimony, the problem with child support guidelines is that they assume that all of the financial burden for providing housing and care and so on for the kids falls on one parent. In other words, the guidelines don't allow for a shared parenting situation where the kids spend a substantial amount of time at the two different houses. The only way they allow for it is through what they call a deviation criteria. I hate that word deviation, but shared parenting in the child support guidelines is a deviation. I won't go into the gory details, but basically it's rarely used. And so basically what you have with child support is one parent is disempowered, financially disadvantaged in terms of their ability to parent the child. And the issue I wanted to raise too is primarily at the low income levels, where the child support guidelines say that the payer, in other words, the person who's not custodial parent but is paying child support, basically has to pay a very large percentage of the low wage that that parent is already getting. So if the parent is earning, say, $10 an hour, they have to pay about half of that, just as a ballpark figure. Maybe more, sometimes a little less, but about half of that child support. And it just doesn't work out. I think in most cases, there's just not enough money left over to live on for the payer. And so that person can end up driven into the underground economy, basically, and end up in criminal court. But the reason they're in criminal court is really because of child support. So I guess that's more of a statement than a question, Colleen. But do you see in your practice, does child support come up? And is that an issue between parents?
Child support comes up everywhere with people saying they're paying way too much, and then other people saying I'm not getting enough, or I'm not getting any, or it's been ordered and I'm not having it received. And so it's always an issue, no matter what's going on. But I think it's an issue that needs to be reviewed, especially for low-income families, because you can't make $15 an hour and pay half of, and live on it, and then pay half of it to child support. There's just no way, to deal with that. But it's always a thorn in somebody's side. The only thing I really would strongly suggest for anybody who's receiving it, not necessarily who's the payer, but if you're receiving it, then I would certainly highly recommend that you have it automatically withdrawn rather than trying to get somebody to write you a check on a weekly basis. So I just think it simplifies and reduces conflict if it's an automatic withdrawal.
Mm,
And if the person
Absolutely.
can't pay it, instead of not seeing your children, please go back to court and address it with the court rather than be taken back to court because your ex is saying you're not paying it. Go back to the court and ask for relief. Obviously, if you can't pay it and you don't have any job, you should let the court know, work something out, but still see your children, please.
Yes, that's a good point. I think my understanding of the law, I'm not a lawyer and I'm not giving legal advice, but there should be really no connection between child support payment or non-payment and your rights to see your child, your parenting time.
Well, that's a whole topic in and of itself. So that statement, I could just hear everybody pointing fingers. What are you, nuts, John? There's a lot to it. So that's just a blanket, it's a statement, but there's a lot to it.
I'm sure there is. And yes, I am a little bit nuts, but that's okay.
No. No, but it's not so simple just to
Right. Okay.
say that.
That's interesting. You know, I mean, one way it comes up is there is incarceration for willful non-payment of child support.
Yes.
But you know, again, at these low income levels, first of all, one thing that happens, because the child support amounts are unrealistic, the guidelines are just unrealistic at the low income levels. And of course, they're that way because you don't want, I guess you don't want, you know, welfare, you don't want the parent to be on welfare. But the fact is the low income earner doesn't have the money to support two households. And,
right, but you also have to look at the person who has the child, especially depending on the age of the child. It might, you know, it's really challenging to be able to pay daycare in this country.
Exactly.
And as well as work. So if you're working for $15 an hour as the person who has the child too, never mind the person who owes the child support, just let's just say mom for the sake of argument, and she's making $15 an hour. There's no way mom can put the child in daycare for that.
Right.
She'd be working to put your child in daycare.
So you put your finger on the ultimate problem is it's a very difficult situation, and that there's just not enough money to go around. You know, the parent who has the primary responsibility for the child needs that money, but the parent who's earning $10 an hour doesn't have the money. And,
right.
And so it's a no-win situation. What we heard from the people who are actually in that situation, the low-income parents and payers, when we were testifying on this issue a few years ago, is that the parent with the child is really much better off if they have something reliable coming in, even a relatively small amount.
Yes.
And the argument was made, and this, by the way, the argument was made by the Department of Social Services, the state of Connecticut Department of Social Services Child Support Collection Agency. They're the guys out there, or women out there, trying to collect child support from the low-income payers. And they were arguing against the unrealistic guidelines. So they were arguing on the side of shared parenting. That was very interesting. And their argument was that the parent receiving the child support would be better off with, say, $20 a week, that they knew they could count on, you know, that they can budget that $20 a week. It's not very much, but it's better than having an unrealistic amount, which is
not receiving
unreliable, and not receiving, and in the end, not receiving anything.
Because, people will always say, give me, you know, any little bit will help.
Right.
But if somebody can't pay the full amount, then they don't pay anything. And that's where I think it's better to either see a mediator and work that out, or go back to court and say, listen, I'm in a pickle, I can't pay it.
Yeah, that's right. Listen, we have a question that just came in on chat.
Sure.
Ever do talks on elective co-parenting that is raising children not resulting in divorce or resulting from divorce rather? I'm sure.
Okay, are you talking about elective co-parent? Can you repeat that?
Okay. Do you ever do talks on elective co-parenting? That is raising kids not resulting in divorce. And then there's a phrase after that.
Raising kids not elective co-parenting while you're married, or elective co-parenting as two single people. I mean, all right, so I'm going to address that, I guess, both ways because I'm not really sure, but two single friends. Ever do talks on elective co-parenting? Well, listen, if you have a child, you're co-parenting. So whether you're married, divorced, or two friends, and you want to have a child, whenever two people come together to create life, and you want to be in the child's life as opposed to you've created life and you're giving up your child. But if you're going to be in the child's life, it's all co-parenting. Married, divorced, whatever scenario you put around it, it's always co-parenting. But you have to have the plan in place about what that looks like. So I always tell people who are newly married or thinking about marriage, you better understand what your perceptions are even around parenting, because that is a conversation that I think is mistakenly missing from the dialogue around marriage, because we all come from our parenting past. You know, our parents parented us, and then we bring some of that into our relationships, and then some new stuff because we don't like what we saw going on. And the same for our partner. So it's like a parental legacy, so to speak, or a genealogical parenting, whatever you want to call it. But you have to have those conversations, I think, because what happens a lot of times is a couple will get married, they have a child, and she's doing it one way, he's doing it another way. Now you're doing this, you're missing each other, you're not coming together, you're thinking the other one's putting the other one down. And reality is you never probably had any conversation about what your thoughts are on parenting. So I think this question is a great question. It doesn't matter if you're married, whether or not you're having the child. And if you're two friends who decide, you know what, let's just go for this. I don't care if you're same sex couple, it doesn't matter at all. You will put out a lot of fires if you plan ahead. And I always say people plan far more for the marriage than they ever do. I mean, for the wedding than they ever do for the marriage. Right. There is like so much detail, but no one sits down and has these basic conversations that really need to happen. And you can actually put a plan together. So if you decide to come together and have a child, well, a child from zero, so to speak, or a newborn, for the first year of life has a whole different set of requirements that you both have to pitch in, as opposed to the 2 to 5 year old. Like that's a whole different skill set. You know, that first year is rough. Who's getting up? Who's changing diapers? Who's this? Who's that? What, you know? And so you really need to have those conversations. When I've met with couples in the past, just when in the past, if I'd be doing couples therapy, and I'd ask the men especially, when did you notice that the marriage started breaking down? And I would swear, John, 9 out of 10 times, that man would tell me when we started having kids. And now they're into 2 or 3 kids. And so there's so many bricks that have been put in the wall. So by the time you come to a therapist or a divorce coach or a life coach or wherever you're going to see, you're already in it deep in a not good way. Like the problem's festered for a long time. It isn't something that's so new. So, but children add a completely different dynamic to a love relationship. Doesn't mean it's a bad thing. I think it becomes a bad thing if you're not on the same page or a similar page, or at least had the conversation. And whether you're friends or not, they're irrelevant. It's anybody coming together, because that could, friends and parents are 2 different things.
Yeah, thank you. I love your perspective.
Man, I love that question. It's a fantastic question.
One thing I would say is that, of course, having children, it just changes your life, and it's hard. I think it's hard to anticipate, when you're in love and you're having dinner and wine and sex, and then you decide to get married. It's really hard to anticipate how radically your life is going to change when you have.
Yeah, and I think good point though, but it radically changes. Some parts are not so great, but most parts are so great, and you learn a lot about yourself. But I knew nothing going into marriage, and I knew nothing going into parenting. nothing. And so looking back, I'm like, wow, I could have done a lot of these things different. But I think now that there's people out there like this and we have these technology where we can get on and actually talk about it, I didn't when I got married. And so I love that we have people like us, a little older, to actually, here's some real life lessons. Let's talk about this. We didn't have those opportunities. And so I'm grateful to be able to share personal experience and professional experience in the field of marriage and relationships and divorce and parenting.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate
Yeah, that was
your
a solid
willingness to share
question.
them.
Thank you for sharing that question. I
Yeah.
loved it. And if anybody wants further information, please, our contact information, you can contact Shared Parenting, you can contact me, and feel free to follow up if anybody needs any other, further questions answered or a conversation that you want to delve a little deeper into. That's really what we're here for.
Come back next Tuesday. We'll be here.
Yes, we will be here next Tuesday.
Okay.
All right. Thank you,
Thanks,
John.
Colleen. Yeah.
And thanks for those of you who came on. Really appreciate it. Thanks for the questions that were written in, and we'll see you next Tuesday at 8.